Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for attending this session. My name's Kamran, and I'm going to be leading off today. I'll introduce my colleague in a second. Today, we're going to be talking about storage optimization analytics, and we're from Accenture. First thing I'm going to do is introduce my colleague, Derek Rodriguez. Derek is one of our senior managers and architects here at Accenture. I am the managing director of a group called the Search and Content Analytics Group. And I'll get into a little bit about what we do as a whole. So Accenture, I'm assuming everybody knows the name Accenture, pretty ubiquitous, but a lot of people don't know the scale of Accenture and the kinds of things that we do in different places. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on us. So it's a 459,000 person company, which is pretty big. $40 billion in revenue, and we pretty much cover every industry and every sort of area that you could get in consulting. Our group is a small group within the Applied Intelligence group of Accenture. Applied Intelligence really looks after everything AI, artificial intelligence, and data related. We are a smaller group that has a narrower focus, and what we work on is applications that are driven by a set of technologies. Search being the primary one, so I'll tell you why we are focused on search. But we're also working with NLP, natural language processing, machine learning, and you'll see how we're combining these technologies to create some really innovative applications for our customers. Most of what we do in my group is on unstructured content, so documents, audio, video, but mostly documents of different types, whether that's stored as PDFs on a file share or in Salesforce or SAP, largely unstructured documents. We actually came to Accenture 2 years ago via an acquisition of a company called Search Technologies. Now, Search Technologies was a company I founded in 2005, and we grew that to about 200 people. And our entire focus was on search at the time, as the name suggested, and it was building applications around search. Today, we've expanded that to incorporate other technologies, as I said, that allow us to build some great applications here. So we're now effectively the search practice within Accenture. So anything that involves search will invariably involve us as an organization. What we did was build a number of different use cases, and today we're going to focus on one of them, but I'll just highlight some of the use cases that we had built before. Of course, intelligent enterprise search is one. That's knowledge management, corporate portals, intranets. And interestingly, we worked with Accenture prior to the acquisition on helping to build the intranet solution that exists at Accenture today. So if you picture 50 content sources, 459,000 people, and security that is involved in that, that's a fairly sizable enterprise search application. But we didn't stop there. We've worked with large retailers like Nike and Samsung. We've worked with hospitals and government portals like the National Archives, and so on. One of the applications that we built with Lucidworks was a recruiting search and match application where we were using search, natural language processing, and machine learning to automatically take resumes and match them to jobs without a human in the loop. Of course, once a recruiter comes in, they see the top 5 candidates that the system had chosen and would then go and verify that they were the right candidates for the job. So that's the kinds of things we're doing. Today, we're going to be talking about storage optimization analytics, which is an application we've recently built, and we're now packaging to go and take to other customers. But Derek Rodriguez has been the main architect on this application, and he'll be talking to you in detail about some of the technical aspects of that. But let me frame the situation that we have here. Although a lot of content is moving to the cloud, most data still resides on the enterprise, and there's an estimate of 65%. There are certain industries that are taking longer to move to the cloud. Pharmaceutical is one of them, financial services another for various regulatory reasons. But still today, 65% of data is on-premise. Now, storage varies in cost. And these are some estimates from IDC stats. So it's about $188 million per exabyte, per 1,000 petabytes. And this is really a conservative estimate because this is really just talking about the storage that houses the data. It's not looking at the backup or any redundancy that you might build in. So the actual cost of storage is enormous for most large organizations. Public cloud is cheaper, and Glacier Cloud is cheaper still, but still it can get very expensive. One question that we get asked a lot now, and we're going to talk about a specific customer, is what data can I move or delete? And the customer that we're talking about today spends over $30 million on storage annually. And their goal was to really reduce that in a clever way without taking on any risk. And I'll talk about that in a second. So moving data is not as straightforward as it might sound. And there are a number of reasons why. There are some complications. First of all, in any given organization, you've got multiple types of storage, right? You've got high-cost storage. You've got now hybrid cloud deployments in many different geographies. So you have to look at where the content is stored today, and that can be a challenge. The second thing is there's a multitude of different types of content. You've got unstructured, semi-structured, and structured. Unstructured content could live anywhere. As I said before, it could be just files on a file share, but it could also be content that's been in SAP or been in Salesforce in many different content repositories. Third, there's all kinds of regulations, especially in some industries like pharmaceutical, where you've got regulatory governance, you've got content that has to be retained for various reasons, and you've got dark data. Dark data is we don't know who created it, we don't know who's using it, and we don't know whether it's got any value. So you've got multiple types of unstructured content that exist today that you've got to take into account. And finally, many different people have created the documents. There's all kinds of data created by instruments. There's unstructured data that we're storing. So these things tend to complicate hey, why don't I just delete a third of my content? If I can find it. So lots of CIOs are asking us, how can we reduce storage costs but manage risks at the same time? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done with a particular customer. This is an application that's now live. The ROI is just excellent. They're saving millions of dollars on storage. And as I said, Derek will tell you about how the application actually was built and works. But when we went into this customer, these are the considerations. These are the questions that we had to ask them in order to determine how do we build this application. So when was the content created? When was it last accessed? Some of this content was decades old. Do we still need it? Who created it? Who owns it? What products are associated with this content? You know, they have specific products that they build, and the content goes with the products. Is there a data retention policy? So there's a whole host of things that we had to determine before we could start to even look at how we would architect a solution. And our solution at a high level was essentially a search-based application. So we had two essential steps that we've got in building this application. The first is we need to understand the content, get the context of the document. So we're using search and connectors. So we're ingesting the content and using search to be able to understand that. Now, we can use natural language processing and machine learning. We've not done a lot of that yet, but that's the next phase of this application. Once we've understood the content, we could then start to develop business rules that would dictate how that content would get treated once we found it. So the second step is working with the business to create those rules and then apply those rules so that we could then move that content. So today, this solution is in production. It's managed by Accenture. So it's a managed service that the customer has wanted us to provide. So we're actually operating and running this. We're not creating the business rules. The customer is in charge of creating the business rules, of course, but we are evolving this application, as I said, to start looking at using natural language processing and machine learning to do things like finding near duplicates. That would allow us to understand that content, and then we can decide what we can do with that. So that's essentially the application that we have built here specifically for reducing the cost of storage in any given large organization. We are now rolling this out as an application to other customers, and in that regard, we've created a very small animated video that kind of highlights the problem that we're trying to solve before we get into the technical details. So I'll play that for you.
Large enterprises are swimming in data, and as more data is collected, storage costs can grow exponentially to exceed millions of dollars. In fact, businesses can add terabytes of data to their servers every day. So it's easy to see how this all adds up. And over time, content can become redundant, stale, and outdated. Introducing Storage Optimization Analytics, Accenture's unique solution for reducing storage costs. Automate the classification and migration of data to less expensive cloud storage, while employing file-level traceability and real-time ROI tracking, leveraging search-based software applications. The solution provides IT departments, CIOs, and content owners with greater visibility into their enterprise storage systems, and the ability to make more informed decisions about what data should be moved or deleted. In just a few clicks, data owners can access a dashboard view of their data footprint, enabling them to quickly remove unneeded data in accordance with all compliance and retention requirements. Manage data more efficiently, reduce storage costs, and start saving your enterprise millions with Storage Optimization Analytics from Accenture. Brought to you by the Search and Content Analytics practice of Accenture Applied Intelligence.
So on the surface, this doesn't really look like a search application, but almost the whole application, it depends on the underlying search platform, plus these associated technologies. So I'm going to hand over to Derek to give you some of the details of how we built this.
Thanks very much, Kamran. So I'm going to break this part of the talk up into two pieces. One is a solution overview, how we're doing this, and then I'll talk a little bit about the feedback, about the particular use case that we're working on with our client. We're better? Okay, thanks. So there are multiple aspects to this. First of all, what we're doing is we're taking the that down here. As Kamran said, we're using the search application. This is a search application. So part of what we've been doing over the years, of course, is, as you may know, working with connectors and various content processing applications to move data from one place to another. And that sits at the heart of what we're doing here. We have our sources on the left. We have the scanning process in the middle. We're actually going through, we're capturing the metadata, capturing the essential signals, if you will, that can be used to make decisions about content. We're doing text extraction, so taking creating additional signals out of the content, including entity extraction and NLP types of operations. And then we're adding context. I'm a big believer in that content is irrelevant out of context. So you have to be able to put other information together. And we've done some interesting things that I think, as search practitioners say, well, that's enterprise search, and that's our point. This is an enterprise problem that we can solve with pretty much what we think are, for us, off-the-shelf approaches that we pulled together to design a good solution. All of that information goes into the search engine, and then we have a disposition user interface on the other side. As Kamran mentioned a minute ago, it's not one, you can't just say, oh yeah, let's just delete that 30% of the content, or delete content over a certain age. You have to take into consideration business applications, and business owners, they really, really get protective of their data. Do I really need that data from 1995? Maybe, but we don't know yet, right? So instead of being heavy-handed and coming in and just sweeping through the data, we've taken the approach, working with this particular customer, our landmark customer here, of putting the customer in the driver's seat. So we call them data stewards, or the people who are the data leads, who actually have the authority to move content, but also have the insights within the organization to support that. So we're doing that at that point, at that level, because it's just so absolutely critical with this particular client in their industry that we can't make mistakes. So we are using Aspire. Any of you know what Aspire is. Aspire is our content processing application that we developed initially back in around 2008, 2009, when we saw very similar problems over and over with our clients. Their search applications weren't working well, and it had nothing to do with the underlying search engine. It was because the content hadn't been prepared properly. So it consists of multiple aspects. One is the connectors to many different sources. We're talking about file shares here today, but we have connectors to other file types, other source types as well. There's a document workflow and text processing aspect to it, which allows us to do that, data munging and data merging. Publisher framework, which we actually use for both surfacing those insights for end users, but also for actually doing the data movement. That is an Accenture asset. So let's just start very, very basic, right? So when you if you think about doing a file system scan, who here has done a file system scan with any kind of a connector, right? So you're going to get some basic information, right? You're going to get information about the files, the paths, the dates, and things like that. You know, that's sort of the building block. That's the basics of your signals right there. So we take all of that and we collect that. We're bringing all that stuff together now with other information where I'm talking about adding context. So what's important for storage optimization is understanding the cost, right? If I've got content that's far more expensive than other content, it may make more sense to go after that earlier because I might get my ROI faster. So we're building that kind of information into the metadata that we eventually feed into the search engine. This is an Aspire document, if you will. We also think it's really important to understand permissions. Now, you think about permissions from a security trimming perspective, right? If I'm searching the application, I should only be able to see the things that I have rights to, right? That's a common pattern in enterprise search. There's another aspect of it too, which is if I'm a data dispositioner, right? If I'm a person making decisions about data, or if I'm an AI agent making decisions about data, it's important to know who has access to that content, right? Because that can show me more about business value. And so you're capturing information like that. We're digging into HR databases. We're digging into the Active Directory and pulling up that kind of information and making those signals into the process as well. So we go a little bit further here. Like I said, we're connecting to another external sources. I'll talk about a couple things here. One is adding context about the creator, right? So within a huge Fortune 100 company, right, there are lots of different business units and lots of different geographies. And it's important to know who those people are. Where do they live? Where do they sit in the organization? What's their business role? And even furthermore, are they still active with the organization, right? Because you're nodding, you understand that situation entirely. You could have a whole bunch of content out there that's associated with people who no longer work for the company. Is it valuable or not? Maybe is the answer. For a number of reasons. One is that there could be regulatory requirements for retaining the data. So you need to be able to capture, this client needs to capture all of that information before they can make that kind of a decision about content. The next part I want to get to is text processing. So at the very, where we're approaching this is we're going metadata level first, because over 10 petabytes, that's a lot of text to extract, right? That's going to take a long time. And so we're looking at the metadata first, and then selectively targeting the content to do full text processing on. But once we do that, we can start to capture information about products and projects and people like that, and start to put together a knowledge graph, which we can also store in the search engine to support those kinds of relationships. So a data steward can come in and say, well, I want to move all of this content, but I want to make sure that it's not associated with this really important project, or maybe it is associated with this particular part of the project that I can move for another reason, which ties into actually a spinoff of this particular proposal, which is working toward the mergers and acquisition space. So finally, once we get that kind of information, the data stewards or business owners can actually go into the content, look in the search engine. we're using both dashboards and also a search user interface, which to allow the users to go in and see the content. And they can see the recommendations based on the signals we captured behind the scenes. What should happen to this data? That is not what did happen to the data, but what should happen. Because we found a lot of pushback from the client, the customers who said, don't do that. I want to have responsibility for that. I want to do it. So we've chosen an opt-in model for this perspective. And so, for, a number of examples might be, they're active files. How do we know if they're active files? What are we going to do with those? We're going to retain those. If they're inactive files, maybe those get removed. Maybe archives get removed. Maybe files out of policy. So, for instance, PST files, which are email archive files, right? By policy, they're not supposed to be stored on this particular network array storage. So that's something we can go after very quickly and easily. Another thing that's really, so when you think about search, you go off and you do a search, a keyword search, you get a list of links and all that stuff. Hierarchies are actually tremendously important here. We think about NAS, 10 petabytes of NAS spread over about 100, over maybe 200 arrays or edge devices, if you will. There are a lot of directories and a lot of paths that need to be handled. And those paths actually have meaning, right? There are business units, there are project names and things in it. And so those are actually really good clues for our clients to make decisions about content. So we're actually seeing them say, rather than going through and picking these 10 documents, they're going through and saying, let's pick these 10 directories and move all of those. Right, and so this actually gets ahead of me a little bit on the user experience here. We are building in the capability for users to make decisions about their content right in the application. We store those decisions, and then we do some background processing on that. Once the content does get moved, and we're actually, for this particular client, we're moving to S3, Amazon S3, or outright deleting the content if it's no longer valid. In those cases, if content gets moved, we're actually supporting recall to come back, right? Because it could be that that content that you moved up to the cloud was really important and you really need to pull it back. So we're supporting recall in a couple different areas. As you can imagine, this is it's hard to think of this as a pushing one button to solve this problem, and so that's why we've wrapped this within a service that we're offering to this particular client and others. And so finally, the movement piece, as I noted a minute ago, those signals are all captured in what we call actions, and those actions are then executed in the background to mark content for movement, and then we automate the movement process, including a validation step to make sure that the content we said we moved was actually the right content, so that when we do remove it from the high-cost storage, we're not putting the company at adverse risk. So, and we take extra care to keep track of the manifest, if you will, or the files that moved, right? Because it's we think about a scientific organization, they have they need to know where everything is for a particular project or particular program. For regulatory purposes, you may have to go back, down the line and report on a particular project and need to show where that supporting data is. So we're providing that so they can update their links and make the right pointers into S3, that kind of thing. So we're also taking great pains to keep track of every action that moves in an audit trail, and we store that and we make sure that gets into cold storage as well, so that if this infrastructure went away at some point, our client would be able to go back and reconstruct and say, well, that's where all this content is, right? Let's talk about a case study here. This is the client I've been talking about here. So Kamran mentioned earlier that storage is expensive. On-premise storage is expensive and it's complicated to maintain. This particular client is adding, I think, 3.5 petabytes a year. And the CIO was like, this is just out of control. 10 petabytes a day, or 10 terabytes a day is added. And they just had no visibility into what that was about. So the current initiative is intended to save them, the next couple of years, several $1 million. But more importantly, it's one of the side benefits of it is it gives them greater confidence in what they have out there, because they have full visibility. They're not just looking at lists of bytes or even file names, but they can go into the search engine. They can see where the content moved, see who was associated with that content initially, and recover that information. And so we're seeing for this particular client, that's actually building thought processes for them is like, this looks a lot like enterprise search. Why don't we just build on that? So it's kind of interesting. So right now we're focusing on NAS, network array storage. We did look at a number of other use cases, and the return on investment for moving some of these other content types like SAN or even databases, it just wasn't there, although that capability is possible. We are considering, particularly this client with other clients, looking at other types of content as well. So your content management systems, like your documentums, if you will, SharePoints, and so on, because they have a lot of content out there that's aged now as well. Documentum dates to what? Early 90s, mid 90s, late 90s. Some of that stuff's been out there for a long time, and they're really looking for a way to triage that kind of thing. So we're using SMB and NFS connectors from the Aspire suite to capture the information about the content. We're operating at scale right now across the world, from APAC to EMEA, US in the middle. Adding context to understand the content. And our perspective on this is that every customer is different, right? So there's no one size fits all. These are the things you drag in and link to. So we're engaged with the client, understanding, from the R&D team, they need this kind of information. From the commercial team, they need a different type of information, and making sure we bring that into the application appropriately. Give them their dashboards and reports, and then allow them to make the data moves, right? So we're choosing to opt into S3 or delete at this point. A little bit about our data mover. Our data mover is, we're using the Java SDK for that to move files or groups of files. Or if needed, we'll bring in a Snowball appliance and move content in that way as well. So now, of course, our client does have a strategic relationship with Amazon, and so that's why we've chosen that. Other cloud providers could, of course, fit into this type of scenario. So, so after we move, we do the audit and show the return on investment. There's some anthropological observations I'll make in a minute about the process here. So we started off with a pilot last year, and production launch was this year, this past summer. And so right now we've scanned content across the world, 2.5 petabytes. And interestingly, just on some very basic business rules, we found 53% of the content meets the criteria for movement, which will allow them to save a lot of money. Now, will we get to move all of that for them? Not necessarily, because of the challenges of understanding, well, what's regulated, what needs to be retained for certain types of purposes, and so on. What do we have? So those are the technical components we just talked about. It's really important for us to make sure that we match the technology to the client. In this case, we're using Aspire and then also open source search engines. We've also brought an asset for the user experience. It's an Angular and Node application, which provides the integration to allow people to find content, to make decisions about content, and then find the content once it got moved back, right? And so on. So the service engagement model, as we've talked about, is it's not a button to push, right? We engage with leadership. We've sorted out ways of identifying those heavy hitters within the organization. So the research scientists who have tons of data flowing off of their microscopes every week and things like that, and focused on that. And then we have an online presence and service desk, if you will, to support questions that clients come to us with about, how is my content eligible? What is the status of the data movement? How do I get started? Things like that. So, the keys to success here, I think, are a handful. One is for an organization of this size, leadership support, because I mean, when was the last time you actually deleted something off of your computer? Yeah, okay, one person, right? Like old photos or whatever, right? It's not in our nature, right? But there are some incentives for the units in this organization to participate. And one is they're charged for their storage, right? So there's at the very best, or at the very least, when we move their content from high cost on-premise to low cost cloud, we're giving them a 9-to-1 cost benefit, right? It's even higher if they're doing things like, as Kamran was saying, doing replication or multiple types of backups and things like that. So we're gaining traction in that way and giving, there's the carrot, if you will, because it's a challenge. And of course, there's a corporate communication strategy behind this that is really helping drive this. So, some obstacles and things to avoid up front if you were to go off and try to do this on your own. Permissions and access are challenging. If you think about NAS, some of this NAS dates back to some of the NetApp is actually maybe early 2000s. Is that right? But there's some old EMC. There's some Windows stuff out there we've been dabbling with. Permissions and access are challenged, right? So just make sure that you got all that squared away. Understand what your network throughput is going to be like, right? Am I really going to be able to scan and move this content over the network, or maybe do I have to be more strategic about it? And we are actually having to do that in some of the outlying regions for this organization. Understanding data life cycles vary, right? So one organization they came to us and they said, well, we're really interested, but not until we publish our paper, right? Which is fine, right? So we'll work with them in that way. And finally, the traceability. One of the biggest questions we always get from the end users is, what if I want my data back? How do I get it back? How do I know where it is? So providing that easy-to-use search interface that's available all the time, search will save the world, is what my mentor Paul Nelson says, is the way to answer that question, right? Because folks can always go back and find that content. So this is a sample architecture I'll just work through here, and please, if there are questions or topics that come to mind here that you want to dig into. I think we're sort of moving toward the discussion phase, if you like. The way we set this up is we've got the sources at the bottom here. We're currently looking at file systems. We scan those with Aspire and then add context. I think this is one of the variables that we need to be able to account for as we move from industry to industry and organization to organization. Having the flexibility to plug in different signals over time, depending on the use case, is important. So all that goes into the search engine. And so my team kind of kids me here because we're almost using the search engine like a database because we do a lot of partial updates and atomic updates because we go back and update the index. But that's the heart and soul of this, right, is the search engine. Once we get that information into the search engine, it goes up into the discovery and new rules generation section. And so we do have secure search in place here. So we're doing LDAP authentication, making sure that people who have the authority to make decisions about content are the ones who can actually have that button show up in the user experience for them. Once they've made those decisions or they've accepted our recommendations, then all of that feeds back into the rules engine and drives the movement. Now, Aspire is actually doing some of the data movement. We're able to move some of the content, just directly right off of we read those the content source right off of the file systems, turn them into a content stream, send it straight off into S3. In other cases, we're finding that more application-specific methods may be more appropriate, and we'll deal with those as we encounter them. But no matter what, no matter how the content is moved or how it's deleted, our application takes into account the storage that was saved, so that if an organization comes to us and says, what is my total footprint? How much can you move for me? How much have been moved by other means? We can still report out at the top level overall costs and overall savings because we're capturing all of that. Next step is actually looking at some of the underlying sources. SharePoint, Documentum, box a little bit. Email is probably going to come into play as well. Databases are certainly an opportunity. There's a ton of content out there in databases. I think there are probably some, the thing about a search engine with a database is you can capture information about the schema and about the overall size with our connectors. Or you could actually go row by row by row and pull all of that data in. And I think there's probably some other ways to analyze and optimize databases that may be more efficient and more effective. But it's still certainly a use case. And of course, data lakes. We, as Kamran pointed out earlier, we do data lake search, and so that can fit on top of this as well. Because we oftentimes find clients who come to us and say, hey, we set up this data lake, but we don't know what's in it. And so that's an opportunity for us as well. And then, of course, the cloud. So we can also index those hybrid cloud solutions, right? Find out what's in S3, find out what's in on-prem, what are the duplicates, and all of that kind of thing. So that's sort of the basic solution that we're using metadata mostly. If we go into the other use cases, we can do things like start to peel back the text files, right? Unpack those text files, do the entity extraction, find out what the content's really about. Then we can also start to think about higher level and more challenging things using machine learning to go off and take some of those rules that have been put into place, identifying those which were the most effective, and using those to play back into the system to make better recommendations down the road. So that'll be an optimization we'll be working on very soon. So, as Kamran pointed out, if a customer did want to go down duplicate and near duplicate detection and removal, we can certainly support that as well. Any of you have done that kind of work, you understand how compute intensive that is. And so that has to be done in a selective way, we think. So anyway, I'm really just about done here. I'd love to have some feedback and some conversation about use cases. And then we can talk about how it's opening up some new opportunities. Yes?
I just wondered if you had a feel for what % of the data you'll actually be able to get rid of, delete, truly delete.
Oh, truly delete? That's a good question. For this client, it's not clear yet, right? Because this client works in a regulated space, and it's difficult to tell right now. I suspect that most of it is going to go to, we're using S3 intelligent tiering, and so that's the lowest cost you can go to without going to Glacier. It's hard to tell right now. We're working with the R&D, which has the most files, right, in the whole system, and also the most valuable files. And so it may, when we move farther into the organization, the amount we can delete may increase, actually.
But the goal of this customer is to reduce the stored content on premise by 35%. That doesn't mean they're going to delete 35%.
Correct.
And that 35% will represent millions of dollars a year at the current storage capacity.
Yeah. It also could help us prevent growth, right? So that's one of the things they're trying to build is awareness of how much are you really costing me, right? Every month or every year, and so it's part of a bigger initiative to make sure that we get responsible data stewardship. Yes, sir.
How much are you bumping up against the content management and records management vendors who are in the space like OpenText and people like that? Surely they are pitching a similar message, right?
Well, right now we're working with Global NAS, which is the biggest footprint, and I work with the Global NAS technical manager for this particular organization. So there's no pressure from there. Of course, Dell would not like us to remove all the content, but they're cooperating, of course. So not really. There's not really friction there because there's not really a challenge at this point. Yeah, I'm not sure if that. We can answer you. We can talk more in the hall if you like.
I don't know who it'd be interesting to know who, say, the OpenText, say, AE is for the account, or the SAP AE is for
right.
Because that person is pitching a similar message.
Sure, right, exactly. Right, and if they have it's about solving the customer's problem. It's not about being everything to everybody. So, if that's the right way to go about it, that's fine. Yeah.
Just a quick question on the search. Do you give the user of the files a search that allows them to find them where they were originally,
Yes.
where they've been moved.
Yes, exactly.
And the result of the link.
Yeah, that's what the full traceability is about. Like, where did it come? Who owned it? And when was it moved? And who moved it? Right?
So that makes it easy for them to accept that it's gone somewhere as long as they can still
Right.
get to it. Right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
My question kind of follows on with that. You're talking all about interactive content that you can leverage this for
You could. And indeed, we're seeing a lot of customers who are saying, you know what, my data lake is really going to be in the cloud now. And we could see moving, okay, fine, let's move it to, we need to go? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we could certainly do that. We can take the conversation out in the hall if you like. We need to cede the floor. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.